Welcome to First Unitarian Society of Minneapolis, the birthplace of Congregational Humanism. We carry on that tradition of free thought today, dedicated to promoting a free search for truth, meaning, and justice. Our web address is firstunitarian.org. I'm David Breeden, Senior Minister. Welcome. Last week, I talked about consciousness itself and how consciousness appears to arise out of combinations and recombinations of sense impressions and words and images and symbols. My claim last week was that transformation occurs personally and socially when we realize that we ourselves are capable of rearranging our consciousness through the conscious manipulation of words and images and symbols. Of course, what I didn't know last week is that we would be presented with a graphic example of how words and images and symbols can create reality. On Wednesday of last week, we watched as the U.S. Capitol building was attacked and overrun by people whose imaginations had run wild. They were not comprehending that quote that I mentioned last Sunday from the Spanish philosopher George Santayana, who said people become superstitious not because they have too much imagination, but because they are not aware that they have any. Words, symbols, images, you use them or they use you. Now, I'm not talking about the power of positive thinking or some sort of manifesting what you wish to be true. People who don't believe in COVID die of it anyway, and we've been watching the very negative consequences of that power of positive thinking since the November election. I'm thinking about understanding the power of words and images and symbols and using those in a positive way. Ways that help the greatest number of people flourish in our nation and in our world. The matrix of symbols on display during the assault on the Capitol were very much about two civil wars. The American Revolution, which was a civil war in which British subjects killed other British subjects, and the American Civil War in which U.S. citizens killed other U.S. citizens. It's easy to forget in our often rosy and rose-colored visions of history that in actual fact, the American revolutionaries were violent extremists. The British soldiers killed at that glorious Battle of Concord were real people, young men whose lives were ended violently over the clash of a set of words and images and symbols. Battles portrayed as glorious victories ignore the reality of the taking of human life. We do well to remember that Americanism, lynching, originates with the Revolutionary War officer Charles Lynch of Virginia, who made the practice a popular way of dealing with loyalists to the crown. The number murdered by Colonel Lynch and lynching in general during that war is still unknown. How many of the insurrectionists this past week realized that they were creating destruction and suffering due to their understanding of certain words and images and symbols? That flag, "Don't Tread on Me," is popular among right-wing extremists today. It's popularly called the Gadsden flag, designed by Christopher Gadsden for the Continental Marines in 1775. Gadsden used the rattlesnake on that flag because it's a poisonous native creature in what is now the United States. Gadsden's Continental Marines were sharpshooters on naval ships charged with killing commissioned officers on enemy ships. Other symbols there included Auschwitz, the Texas Revolution battle flag, "Come and Take It," and of course the ubiquitous Confederate battle flag. All symbols, all of them about violence, all of them about creating puppets on strings. And we do well to remember that when terrorists win, they become patriots. That's how words work for those who do not think about how words work. Last week, I used some of the ideas of the psychologist Carl Jung. He had this to say about words, quote, "There are hellish webs of words." But what are words? Be tentative with words. Value them well. Take safe words, words without catches. Do not spin them with one another in order that webs arise, for you are the first to be ensnared in those webs. End quote. Words matter because they create our thoughts, which create the reality we act within, and often that is a delusional reality. Let's take another example. We've all heard the phrase "mom and apple pie," and it's innocuous enough. The phrase originated in the Second World War period, when journalists would ask American young people what they were fighting for. The stock answer became "mom and apple pie." Mom and apple pie are considerably more concrete answers than democracy or the American way of life. It's an answer that encompasses images of peace and domesticity and plenty. It's an attractive vision, and the returning veterans pursued that vision of domestic plenty, I'd say, with a vengeance. As it happened, the simple vision of mom and apple pie created a situation in which mom had severely restricted economic and social freedoms, and apple pie became a mass-produced commodity full of chemicals with unpronounceable names. And the vision has yet to transform all these years later. It turns out all of the warring nations in that war were fighting for some vision of mom and apple pie. But what if, rather than mom and apple pie, the answer about what we were fighting for had been, the family that can't live next door to me, or the kid next door who can't get an education? The images and the symbols we have in our consciousness create the reality that we act within. While we're on the subject of moms and how the human imagination works, consider for a moment that day we call Mother's Day. And Mother's Day exists in various countries on various calendar dates. In the US, Mother's Day began as a sort of commemoration. It was about women against war. And now it's another sort of commemoration, a celebration of motherhood itself, often of a very sentimental type in that mom and apple pie category. Mother's Day is a human imaginary construction. It exists when it does and how it does according to a set of words and images and symbols. Yet it has real effects in the world. Travel goes up, chocolate sales and phone call volumes go up, and very real people are made glad and sad by what happens on something that we call Mother's Day. We have agreed that it is a thing, and thereby we have made it a thing. But if a sufficient number of people cease to celebrate it, it would go away. It would disappear because actually it's imaginary. If you still don't believe me when I say it's all about words and symbols, reflect for a moment on the role of Twitter in U.S. government for the past 4 years. Twitter is a platform that communicates words and images and symbols, and an entire alternate reality has been created by those words and images and symbols, an alternate reality that oppresses and kills people. Webs of words arose, as Carl Jung would have phrased it, and many people were ensnared in them. puppets on strings, as I talked about last week, people acting out of delusion and fear, which is exactly the opposite of the humanist ideal. Religion, philosophy, government, humanism teaches us that they all have one thing in common. All are products of the human mind. They are examples of human creativity, works of art and artifice. Judaism is a long poem. Lots of people have written parts of that poem. Lots of people have revised parts of that poem. Christianity is a poem. Capitalism is a poem. Democracy is a long poem. All are works of art, works of the human imagination. And there are no gods pulling any of those strings. Over time, individuals interact with these large poetic narratives by being born into them, by living in their purview, by adapting to them, or by leaving them. Because they were here when we arrived in this world, it's easy to miss the fact that they are all works of art that morph and change with the passage of time. Yes, religions and philosophies and governments are monoliths in one sense, but they are also leaves of grass, touchable, manipulable, organic, fragile. Like Mother's Day, they exist only because a certain number of people believe in them and protect them. Governments, religions, the stories of history that we tell ourselves, all those monoliths have brought the human species to the place where we are today. Those symbols of rebellion and revolution and mass murder that we saw on Wednesday create the place where Americans live today. An unjust social system, a focus on the self that not only creates extremes in wealth and narcissism, but also anxiety and stress and desperation. Mom, real moms, in her many hues, battles for the right for her own body, gets paid less than dad, can't afford health care, and can't feed her children. That apple pie is $4.99 in the frozen section, available if you can afford it and if you have a place to take it and cook it. As we saw graphically last week with events at the nation's capital, images and symbols and words create concrete actions of both cowardice and bravery. Democracy, despite all its armies and its buildings, is as made up as Mother's Day. It's a story that we tell ourselves. There's lots of ways to tell that story and lots of ways to redefine it. But humanism insists that we must tell the story in a way that leads to human flourishing, or the valuable fiction disappears. The futurist Buckminster Fuller, during his lectures, would teach people how to tie a square knot. He would stand up and go carefully through the motions, having the audience follow his lead. And then later in the lecture, he would stop and ask people if they remembered how to tie a square knot. And many did. Then Fuller would ask the audience if he had used rope for his demonstration on how to tie a knot. Many people remembered that he had indeed used a rope, but he had not. His point was that we human beings have amazing imaginations. We can clearly picture a rope when it's not even there. We can learn to tie a particular knot without ever touching a rope. The human imagination is extremely powerful. But in that very power lies our greatest danger to ourselves and to others in our society. One of the reasons that William Shakespeare's work still matters in the world today is that Shakespeare's Renaissance-inspired imagination understood, comprehended the fact that human beings create our collective reality. Shakespeare's kings used their words to create their kingdoms in the minds of others, sometimes for good and sometimes for ill. Shakespeare shows England's Henry V conquering northern France and creating an empire through his ability to use words to inspire his army and to frighten the French. On the other hand, the pathetic Richard II loses his kingdom and his life because he is so narcissistic that he can't use his words to cast a positive vision for his subjects. And so they rebel. Yes, that's a very Renaissance idea. Shakespeare was a person of his time. But Shakespeare's assessment of human agency and human nature is baked into the humanism that flowered in the European Renaissance period. Shakespeare's vision is a way of understanding the malleability and fragility of human institutions. It's also a way toward understanding each generation's awesome responsibility to take responsibility. The great German poet Goethe said, "Few people have the imagination for reality." Now, I think that's only partially true. We all imagine a reality. Not so many of us can imagine how much of reality is only imaginary. A religion can drive people to the extremity of murder, but stop believing in that religion and its power is gone. It's like magic. And democracy is just like that. It's a thing only so long as we believe in it. And it's a positive force in the world only so long as we imagine a story in which democracy contributes to positive freedoms. Some people call Jim Crow laws freedom. Some called separate but equal freedom. Some call the attack on the Capitol freedom. The gate at Auschwitz said, "Work makes you free." We must use words carefully, and we must insist upon what they mean, lest we fall into that ensnaring web that Carl Jung warned us about. Maya Angelou once wrote, "What you're supposed to do when you don't like a thing is change it. If you can't change it, change the way you think about it. Don't complain," end quote. And I know I sound like a broken record, but the mantra of humanism is that human beings can fix human problems. That truth, believing that truth has its implications for us humanists, and it has consequences and it has responsibilities. For one thing, it also means that human beings create many of the human problems that we have to go out there and then solve. Most of us didn't much like that "Make America Great Again" slogan. We insisted that America was never great enough for enough of her citizens and her potential citizens. I hope we will all keep in mind in the next weeks that America isn't great again just because there's a different administration of the opposite political persuasion. Yes, we kept working all these past years, doing what we could to make the American story in reality live up to the fiction. Our definition of great has to do with equality and equity and striving always to make everyone free, free to be themselves and free from fear, free from the chains of poverty and necessity. We've got to use our words. Let's insist upon a communal social truth. Let's insist upon a freedom and a democracy in which all are free and all have a choice and a voice. Will we succeed? Well, of course not. That's the beauty and the hope in understanding that words matter and the definitions can be changed. May we use our words responsibly and prophetically. And may we cast a vision that calls in rather than calls out, that imagines a democracy that means peace and justice for all. Thanks for listening. You can find much more about humanism and what's happening at First Unitarian Society in Minneapolis by visiting our website at firstunitarian.org.